Deep in the rainforest, a toucan effortlessly plucks fruit from a thin branch that can barely support its own weight with that massive beak. With a beak that makes up nearly 40% of its body length, this doesn't make sense. A beak this big should throw off balance, make flying difficult. The weight of its head should constantly pull it forward, make it wobble with every move. Yet the toucan glides through the forest canopy with a precision that even amazes engineers. Dr. Glenn Tattersall from Brock University calls it one of creation's most astonishing masterpieces. Eagles rely on power and talons, parrots on their short, strong beaks. But what about the toucan? Its massive beak is actually completely hollow and light as a feather. Plus, it works like a natural cooler, releasing excess heat from its body in the tropical heat. Tonight, we'll discover how the toucan's seemingly impossible beak is actually a perfect design marvel and its surprising functions. If this extraordinary design fascinates you as much as it does me, hit like and subscribe. In the comments, write where you're watching from, what time it is there, and what surprises you most about the toucan. You're the reason we keep exploring nature's secrets. Thank you for being here. First, let's note that researchers don't fully agree on the findings we'll be discussing. Some information is not definitive. Now let's take a closer look at how this extraordinary beak works. In the rainforest, the air is heavy. Light filtering through the leaves appears in patches on the ground. Branches, vines, and leaves are intertwined. Bird calls come from above. The toucan perches on a branch as thick as your thumb. That massive beak should tip the bird forward, hurl it down through the tree canopy. But the bird maintains its balance perfectly. We've been watching toucans for centuries, and that beak has captured our attention from the very beginning. Early naturalists saw the serrated edges on the beak and thought these birds hunted fish. They assumed this beak pointed to a carnivorous bird that fed by tearing its prey apart. The logic seemed solid. Big beak equals big predator, but they were wrong. The toucan's beak is the most important part of its life. Like many birds constantly renew their beaks. Parrots' beaks grow very fast, so they renew them. Woodpeckers' beaks wear down from constantly hitting hard tree trunks. They have to renew them. See, with the toucan, it's different. Its beak is hollow inside and doesn't wear down, so it doesn't need to renew its beak. This beak makes up a third of the toucan's body length. What about its weight? These numbers should match up. Yet in the toucan, the beak makes up only 3% of body weight. A structure this big should be heavy. It should require dense bone, thick walls, a solid structure. Generally, a long structure is expected to have a certain mass to be durable. For this reason, it's unusual for an extension attached to the face and 20 centimeters long to be almost weightless. But in nature, things are different. Inside that bright orange outer surface is a different structure. The beak is hollow but not completely empty. Instead of solid bone, there's a foam-like structure. Inside, thin bone struts connect to each other and keep the beak solid without adding extra weight. The network formed by these thin bone struts resembles a honeycomb. Each piece is very thin. This keeps the beak light. But because these pieces are arranged in a certain order, they don't concentrate force at a single point. When the toucan bites into a hard fruit, the pressure spreads inside the beak. So the load distributes to many connections, not a single point. The outer shell completes this structure. This outer shell is covered with keratin. Our nails are also covered with this substance. But in toucans, this layer is thinner than even a strand of hair. The keratin layers interlock to form a solid surface that protects the delicate structure inside. Besides that, being light isn't the beak's only feature. This was found in 2009 by researchers in Canada. They were recording toucans in the forest with thermal cameras. They were watching how they regulated their body temperature under different conditions. One of them, Dr. Glenn Tattersall, noticed the toucan's beak was sometimes very hot, sometimes cool. When he examined this more closely, he realized it was related to air temperature. At low temperatures, the beak was the same temperature as the surrounding air. Cold environment, cold beak. But when the air temperature rose, something changed. The beak started radiating heat. First, the face warmed up. Blood vessels expanded and sent warm blood from the body's core to the beak structure. The part of the beak closest to the face started releasing heat outward. We're looking at a biological radiator. Under that keratin shell, there's a dense network of blood vessels ready to move heat away from the body's core when needed. At 70 Fahrenheit, about 20 Celsius, the beak radiates most of the heat the toucan produces. You might think these temperatures aren't hot, but because the toucan's body constantly produces heat, it has to release heat from the body even at low temperatures. This system is extremely effective. Relative to body size, we're seeing one of the most effective evaporation-free cooling systems in the animal kingdom. No sweating, no panting, just controlled blood flow and heat radiating from the surface. This is what that oversized beak actually does. It prevents the bird from cooking itself in the tropical heat. But running such an efficient radiator obviously has a cost. When the temperature drops, the toucan faces a new problem: losing too much heat, especially after intense flight. While resting at midday, their bodies get very cold. To prevent this from happening while resting, they tuck their massive beaks under their wings. They also curl their tails on top. With this, they prevent excessive heat loss. Closing such a big beak requires delicate control. The bird constricts its blood vessels, moves warm blood away from the beak, and keeps it circulating in the body's core. Then it tucks that massive beak under its wing, covers it with feathers, essentially wraps its radiator in a blanket. When they overheat, they can also regulate their beak's temperature. They can discharge heat very quickly and briefly. Adult toucans are perfect at controlling the heat in their beaks. They almost never make mistakes. They've learned to regulate blood flow with extraordinary precision, adjusting their cooling system in real time as conditions change. But young toucans can't do this. Chicks with growing beaks face a challenge. Dr. Tattersall observed this in 2 young toucans whose beaks were actively growing. The youngsters couldn't manage this fine control. When it got very cold, they couldn't shut off their radiators. They need constant blood flow to build the beak. If they cut off this flow, growth slows, gets damaged. In this situation, growing the beak means accepting heat loss. Young birds shiver even in warm weather. They struggle to maintain core body temperature while their developing beaks leak heat into the air. They can't cut off this flow without disrupting growth. This is a fragile period every toucan must get through. If there's too much heat loss, the chick rapidly depletes its energy reserves. If there's too little blood flow, the beak doesn't develop properly. This balance matters because that beak has to last a lifetime. It doesn't renew, damage is permanent, so the structure must form solid and correct from the start, despite harsh conditions. This extraordinary beak design shapes every moment of the toucan's daily life. From dawn to dusk, this giant beak accompanies the toucan's every move as both tool and burden. Now let's look at how a toucan's typical day goes. Chapter 2. The forest starts to brighten before the sun actually appears. Shadows shift from black to grey. Temperature changes by a few degrees. And somewhere in the tree canopy, high up, toucans start to stir. They don't call out immediately. The forest wakes in layers and toucans wait their turn. Smaller birds start first, filling the pre-dawn air with their songs and territorial calls. The collective sounds slowly rise. Each species adds its own voice to the morning soundscape. Then about 5 minutes before sunrise, we hear the first toucan calls. These first sounds are low, rhythmic. They just announce the birds are awake and present. This becomes more pronounced early in breeding season. Adult toucans become very vocally active in the early periods of breeding season. They stay noisy even during molting season. They continue their calls throughout the day. The calls continue as light filters through the leaves. We listen to birds re-establishing communication with each other after hours of silence, confirming where they spent the night. This is a slow process, deliberate. The forest has all day, and so do the toucans. When the calls subside, feeding begins. Toucans don't go far initially. They visit trees near where they roosted, familiar places they've been using for weeks or months. These nearby fruit sources get checked every morning, as regular as sunrise. You watch a toucan move along a branch, approaching a cluster where ripe fruit is found. The bird doesn't rush. Each hop is measured, careful. Feet with 2 toes forward, 2 toes back, grip the branch firmly before moving to the next position. Like woodpeckers, like parrots, toucans also have 2 toes facing forward, 2 facing back. This foot structure provides balance when moving through dense branches or entering and exiting tree cavities. Once balance is secured, the beak reaches out, plucks a piece of fruit, and the head tilts back. The fruit slides down the throat without being chewed. Swallowing happens within seconds, then the process repeats. Another piece, another tilt, another swallow. This continues until nearby trees are depleted or the bird decides it's eaten enough. Either way, morning feeding eventually ends. From this point on, the day's flow changes. It takes toucans 75 minutes to properly digest fruit. During this time, the bird can't feed efficiently because its digestive system is already full and active. The crop processes the pulp. Hard seeds get separated. Everything moves at its own pace. So what does a toucan do during this 75-minute waiting period? They socialize. Toucans are quite social birds and are usually found in pairs or small flocks of about 6 members. They engage in behaviors that look like play but have meaning. They frequently fence with their beaks, play chase, and vocalize. These behaviors are about maintaining bonds between mates. They also help preserve order within the flock. Beak fencing is common. 2. Birds face each other on a branch and rapidly strike their beaks together. The sound echoes in the tree canopy. This is a distinctive sound that announces the interaction to everyone nearby. Neither looks aggressive. The movements are controlled and coordinated. They establish things, work out social positions, but they don't do it by fighting. Think about the last time you shook someone's hand, a firm grip, eye contact, confidence. Beak fencing is similar. The force of the strikes, the duration, all of it transfers information between the birds. Chase games add movement to social time. One bird hops away, the other follows. They move through branches with pursuit patterns that seem random, but probably aren't. Young toucans do this more often than adults. They probably learn spatial navigation or test their ability to move quickly through complex environments, or they just want to play. Birds also do feather maintenance during digestion time, not just their own, each other's too. One toucan presents its neck or back, another uses its beak to arrange feathers, clean debris. Does grooming tasks the bird can't reach on its own. This behavior further strengthens social bonds within the group. The tree canopy provides everything these birds need without having to descend. Fruit grows at this level. Water pools inside broad-leaved plants and in tree hollows after rain. Nest cavities exist in dead branches and old woodpecker nests. There's no need to go to the forest floor, and there are many reasons not to. Predators move differently at ground level. Jaguars hunt there. Large snakes move through the leaf litter. When you leave the relatively safe tree canopy, risks increase seriously. So toucans stay high. They've built their entire lifestyle around this elevated environment. Toucans spend most of their lives in the rainforest's upper canopy. Moving within the tree canopy happens primarily by hopping. You might think birds fly everywhere, but toucans don't. Flight is expensive. Wings that are small relative to body size require many rapid flaps to stay airborne. Their large beaks also make flight laborious. Every flight consumes energy that could be conserved by hopping, so they hop, branch to branch, tree to tree if the canopy is dense enough. The movements look strange to us. This large-beaked bird bounces along as if testing each landing spot, but it works. When flight is necessary, they display a distinctive flight style, a few rapid wing beats to gain altitude and speed, then a glide. Then another series of flaps, another glide. This pattern repeats. This method allows them to cover short distances efficiently while conserving energy. Most of the time, toucans fly in single file, following the same path through the tree canopy, one after another. As morning turns to afternoon, feeding resumes. The birds leave their living area and search for new fruit sources. This is when longer flights happen, when the group goes together to places beyond the familiar nearby trees. Finding fruit requires knowing the forest, which trees are currently fruiting, which ones fruited last week and are now depleted, which ones will fruit next month but aren't ready yet. Toucans build this knowledge over time, mapping their territory through repeated visits and observations. The search can take hours. We watch a group move from tree to tree. They find some full of ripe fruit, others with nothing worth eating. At each stop, they decide stay and feed or move to the next spot. You notice the birds seem to consult with each other through calls and body language before the group moves as a whole. Searching for fruit in groups provides a strategic advantage. Information sharing, more efficient searching, less energy loss. But this social structure has a cost: competition. In some parts of the forest, especially where extremely abundant resources like bamboo are found, a completely different approach works, living completely alone without any need to socialize. In our next journey, we'll discover how the giant panda successfully survives with a completely isolated life without forming social bonds. But now let's return to the toucan's daily rhythm. Afternoon feeding follows the same pattern as morning: pluck, tilt, swallow. Repeat until full. Then wait again while digestion happens. More socializing, more feather maintenance, more beak fencing. The day's rhythm is consistent: feed, digest, socialize. As afternoon approaches evening, you notice the light changing, the angle shifts, shadows lengthen, temperature starts dropping in small increments, and the birds begin moving back toward roosting sites. On clear evenings, they stop calling at sunset. The sounds that filled the morning hours disappear as darkness approaches. Toucans are diurnal. They're active during the day, motionless at night. When the sun sets, they fall silent. The evening routine is a reverse mirror of morning. Birds return to familiar trees, familiar branches, familiar cavities. It might seem strange for a bird with such a large beak to choose a small enclosed space for a nest, but they have a solution for this. After settling into its comfortable nest, the toucan turns its head back and tucks its beak onto its back, under one wing. Then it brings its tail straight up and over its head. The entire bird assumes a compact shape that hardly resembles a toucan anymore. Tree cavities provide protection throughout the night. The enclosed space makes it harder for predators to reach them. Owls hunt at night, and a toucan sleeping on an open branch would be defenseless, but tucked inside a cavity with only a small entrance to protect, the bird is much safer. Some cavities hold more than one toucan. Birds roost communally, sharing the same cavity night after night. There's warmth in numbers and probably security too. More eyes to notice danger even in darkness, and then the forest truly quiets. Diurnal birds have settled. Nocturnal hunters have started their own routines. The tree canopy transitions from one living group to another, and toucans just wait for morning. This pattern repeats every day. Wake before sunrise. Call to announce presence. Feed on nearby fruit. Digest while socializing. Search for new fruit sources. Feed again. Digest again. Return to roost. Sleep. The routine rarely changes outside breeding season. During that time, nesting duties interrupt the usual schedule, but breeding brings its own rhythms, its own requirements. And those requirements change everything about how toucans spend their time. This daily routine we've watched happens during the period between breeding seasons, when the birds can focus entirely on feeding and maintaining social bonds. When breeding begins, pair bonds become more selective. The mutual preening that happens within the group now occurs only between mates. Beak fencing continues, but with different intent, and fruit-tossing behavior emerges. The male toucan takes a fig in his beak, looks at the female, and then, with unexpected, almost absurd grace, tosses the fruit toward her. The female catches the fruit in midair, tilts her head slightly, then it's her turn. Chapter 3. The daily routine continues through most of the year. Feeding, digesting, socializing, the pattern stays consistent. But when breeding season approaches, something shifts in how toucans interact with each other. The change starts subtle. A male picks up a piece of fruit, and instead of swallowing it immediately, he hops closer to a female. He holds the fruit in his beak, waiting. The female watches. Then she reaches out with her own beak and takes the fruit from him. What happens next looks almost playful. The female tosses the fruit back to the male. He catches it, holds it for a moment, then tosses it back to her. This continues, fruit passing between beaks in a gentle rhythm that has nothing to do with hunger. They're not eating, they're communicating through shared movement and timing. We call this fruit tossing, and it serves as the foundation of toucan courtship. The behavior seems simple when you first observe it, two birds passing food back and forth, but the mechanics reveal careful coordination. Each toss must be accurate enough for the other bird to catch. Each catch requires attention and readiness. The ritual demands cooperation. Think about tossing a ball with someone. You adjust your throw based on their position, their readiness, their skill level. You build a rhythm together. Toucan pairs do something similar, using fruit instead of a ball and beaks instead of hands. The tosses continue for minutes at a time. Neither bird rushes. The pace stays measured, controlled. If one bird drops the fruit, they simply pick it up and start again. There's no frustration, no sense of failure, just continuation of the pattern until both birds seem satisfied. This fruit exchange happens between potential mates, but we also see it in established pairs. The behavior reinforces bonds that already exist rather than creating new ones. A mated pair might engage in fruit tossing weeks or months after they initially paired up, using the ritual to maintain their connection. The choice of fruit matters less than the act itself. Any available fruit works, small berries, larger tropical fruits, whatever grows nearby. The important element is the exchange, not the specific item being exchanged. While fruit tossing happens, other behaviors emerge alongside it. Bill fencing becomes more frequent between potential mates. We watched this during social time in the previous chapter. Birds tapping beaks to establish dominance or maintain social structure. During courtship, the behavior takes on different characteristics. The tapping is gentler, the rhythm more synchronized. Two birds face each other and touch beaks repeatedly in patterns that look almost like a conversation. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, tap. The sequence varies but maintains an underlying structure. Each bird responds to the other's timing. Bill fencing during courtship lacks the competitive edge we see in other contexts. Nobody is establishing dominance here. Instead, the birds are testing compatibility, learning each other's rhythms, building familiarity through repeated physical contact. Your own hand reaches out to shake someone else's hand. You match their grip strength, their timing, their duration. Too weak seems uncertain. Too strong seems aggressive. The right balance communicates confidence and respect. Toucan bill fencing works through similar principles. The courtship period extends over days or weeks. We don't see instant pair formation. Toucans take time with this process, gradually increasing their interactions until two birds spend most of their time together. They feed near each other, roost in adjacent cavities, move through the canopy as a unit rather than as part of the larger flock. Mutual grooming intensifies between courting birds. The preening that happens casually within the flock becomes focused and prolonged between potential mates. One bird spends 10, 15, 20 minutes carefully working through the other's feathers. The recipient stays motionless, trusting its companion completely. This trust matters. A toucan's beak can cause damage if used carelessly. Those serrated edges, that powerful bite force necessary for cracking tough fruit, all of it becomes a potential threat if directed improperly. Allowing another bird that close that much access requires confidence in their intentions. We see the grooming sessions happen most frequently in late afternoon, after feeding is complete, and digestion time allows for extended social interaction. The pair settles on a branch in a relatively sheltered spot within the canopy. One bird presents its head and neck, the other begins preening. The movements are methodical, each feather gets individual attention. The grooming bird uses the tip of its beak to separate feathers, remove any debris, arrange everything back into proper alignment. The process looks meditative, neither bird appears rushed or distracted. Occasionally the roles reverse, the bird being groomed shifts position to groom its partner. They trade back and forth, each taking turns in both roles. This reciprocity seems important. We rarely see one-sided grooming between courting pairs. Both birds participate equally. The beak's appearance plays a role in mate selection, though we're still learning exactly how. The brightest, most vibrant beaks tend to belong to the healthiest birds. Color intensity correlates with diet quality and overall condition. A dull or damaged beak might indicate poor nutrition or recent illness, so when we watch toucans evaluate potential mates, we're watching them assess health markers through visual examination. The beak serves as an honest signal difficult to fake, displaying the bird's current state through characteristics that can't be easily manipulated. Young toucans have duller beaks than adults. The full color intensity develops over months and years as the bird matures. Juveniles trying to court might find themselves ignored simply because their beaks haven't reached adult coloration yet. The visual signal tells other birds this individual isn't ready to breed. Once a pair forms, the bond appears to last at least through the breeding season. Toucans are described as monogamous during this period, though whether the same pairs stay together across multiple years remains less certain. We know pairs work together to raise young. We observe them maintaining exclusive relationships while eggs are being incubated and chicks are being fed. But after the breeding season ends and young birds have fledged, pair bonds sometimes dissolve. The male and female might rejoin the larger flock as individuals rather than as a bonded unit, or they might stay together, continuing their partnership into the next year. The variation makes it difficult to make absolute statements about toucan mating systems. Some pairs seem to mate for life, others stay together for a single season. The flexibility probably relates to individual circumstances, food availability, and other environmental factors we're still working to understand. What we do know is that during the courtship period and throughout breeding, the relationship between mated toucans becomes the center of their social world. The interactions with the broader flock decrease. Mutual grooming happens exclusively between mates rather than among flock members. The pair spends nights in the same cavity rather than in separate roosting sites. This shift from flock member to pair member represents a significant change in daily routine. The bird that previously socialized freely with a dozen companions now focuses almost entirely on one individual. Fruit tossing, bill fencing, and mutual grooming occupy time that was previously spent in group activities, and all of this courtship behavior leads toward a specific goal: finding a suitable nesting site, preparing for eggs, raising young together. The fruit tossing and bill fencing aren't just displays, they're testing compatibility for a partnership that will demand cooperation under challenging circumstances, because raising toucan chicks requires constant attention from both parents. The eggs need regular incubation. The hatchlings emerge completely helpless. Feeding them, protecting them, keeping them warm, all of it demands coordinated effort between male and female, so the courtship period serves as preparation. Can these two birds work together effectively? Can they coordinate their actions? Can they trust each other enough to share nesting duties? The fruit passes back and forth between beaks. The bills tap together in synchronized rhythm. The preening continues for long, quiet minutes. And through all of it, two toucans are learning whether they can build something together that neither could accomplish alone. Chapter 4. Somewhere in the canopy, a woodpecker abandoned a hole months ago. The cavity extends about 18 inches into the trunk, hollowed out over weeks of persistent pecking. The entrance is small, maybe 3 inches across. Inside, the space widens into a chamber just large enough for a bird to turn around. This is what toucans look for when they need a home. They don't excavate their own cavities, despite having that large beak. The structure isn't designed for drilling into solid wood. Too much force would damage the delicate foam interior. So toucans search for existing holes, spaces created by other species, or by natural decay. The search begins weeks before breeding season. A pair moves through their territory inspecting potential sites. They land near a cavity entrance, peer inside, sometimes enter, to examine the interior dimensions. Most holes get rejected, too shallow. Wrong orientation, entrance too exposed to weather or predators. Finding the right cavity takes patience. The birds return to the same trees repeatedly, re-evaluating options as conditions change. A hole that looked unsuitable in early inspection might become acceptable after reconsidering the alternatives, or a cavity that seemed perfect initially might get claimed by another species before the toucans commit to it. Height matters. Toucans prefer nesting sites around 20 feet off the ground, high enough to avoid most ground predators, but not so high that accessing the cavity becomes difficult. The canopy layer where they spend their days sits higher, but nesting happens in a zone where multiple tree species overlap and cavity options are more abundant. The entrance size requires particular attention. Too large and predators can enter easily. Snakes, climbing mammals, even other birds might invade a cavity with an oversized opening, but too small and the toucans themselves struggle to get in and out. A 3-inch entrance diameter represents a compromise. Small enough to exclude most threats, large enough for an adult toucan to squeeze through with some maneuvering. The bird approaches the hole, turns its head to angle the beak properly, and slips inside with practiced efficiency. You might wonder how a bird with a beak measuring 7 or 8 inches manages to fit through an opening barely wider than a tennis ball. The answer involves flexibility and positioning. The beak isn't rigidly fixed. The toucan can angle it in various directions, finding the alignment that allows passage through the narrow entrance. Once inside, the challenge shifts. The cavity interior isn't much larger than the entrance tunnel, a chamber perhaps 12 inches wide, 18 inches deep. Enough space for an adult bird, but barely. Add a mate, and things get crowded. This is where that sleeping position becomes essential. The toucan settles into the cavity, then performs the transformation we described earlier. Head turns backward, beak lays along the back tucked under a wing, tail flips up and forward over the head. The bird compacts into roughly half its normal length. What looked like an impossibly tight fit suddenly becomes workable. The tucked position allows two adult toucans to share a cavity that would never accommodate them both if they remained in normal posture. Think about curling up in a small space. You pull your knees toward your chest, tuck your arms in, make yourself as small as possible. Toucans do something similar, though their anatomy allows more extreme compression than ours does. The cavity stays relatively bare. Toucans don't build elaborate nests. They might arrange a few wood chips or add some soft grass, but mostly they use whatever material already lines the hole. Early in the season, they clean the cavity thoroughly, removing debris and old nesting material from previous occupants. This cleanliness doesn't last. As the season progresses, the cavity accumulates droppings and seed fragments. The toucans don't remove waste material regularly. The floor gradually fills with a layer of fruit pits, fecal matter, and shed feathers. By the time chicks fledge, the once clean cavity has transformed into something significantly messier. But the mess doesn't seem to bother the birds. They continue using the same cavity year after year if it remains structurally sound. The accumulated debris probably provides some insulation and possibly cushioning for eggs and young chicks. Not all cavities sit in living trees. Sometimes toucans nest in dead trunks, snags that have been standing for years after the tree died. These locations offer advantages and disadvantages. Dead wood is often softer, allowing easier modification of the cavity if needed, but structural integrity becomes questionable. A strong wind might topple the entire snag, destroying the nest. Occasionally, toucans select truly unusual sites, holes in earthen banks along streams, chambers inside termite mounds, cavities in fence posts, or even buildings if human structures exist nearby. The birds show remarkable flexibility in what they'll accept as suitable nesting space. The critical requirements seem to be protection from weather, security from predators, and enough interior volume to accommodate adults and eventually eggs and chicks. Everything else is negotiable. Once a cavity is selected, the pair begins spending nights there. This happens before eggs are laid, sometimes weeks in advance. They're establishing ownership, marking the territory, getting comfortable with the space. Other toucans see them entering and leaving the cavity repeatedly and understand this site is claimed. Territory defense around the nesting cavity remains relatively low-key. Toucans don't aggressively chase away every bird that flies nearby, but if another toucan approaches the cavity entrance with apparent interest, the resident pair makes their presence known through calls and displays. The days pass with a familiar rhythm: morning feeding, midday rest inside or near the cavity, afternoon feeding, evening return to the cavity for the night. The pair synchronizes their schedule, leaving and returning together most of the time. Inside the cavity during daylight hours, both birds fit themselves into that compact sleeping position even though they're not actually sleeping. The posture conserves space and probably helps with temperature regulation. The enclosed cavity traps body heat, creating a microclimate several degrees warmer than the outside air. On cooler days, this matters. On hot days, the birds might spend less time inside, choosing shaded branches nearby instead. The cavity serves multiple purposes: nighttime roost, shelter from rain, protected space for temperature regulation, and eventually nursery for eggs and chicks. The interior darkness provides additional security. Predators hunting by sight struggle to locate birds hidden deep inside a tree trunk. The narrow entrance creates a bottleneck that's easy to defend. An adult toucan positioned just inside the opening can use its beak to discourage intruders, pecking at anything that tries to enter. We sometimes observe multiple toucans using the same cavity overnight, particularly outside breeding season. 3, 4, sometimes 5 birds squeeze into a space designed for 2. They arrange themselves carefully, each finding a position that minimizes contact with the others while still fitting within the available volume. The communal roosting probably offers thermal benefits. More bodies generate more heat. On cold nights, the shared warmth helps maintain comfortable temperatures without forcing each bird to burn extra calories for heating. But during breeding season, the cavity becomes exclusive territory for the mated pair. Other toucans are no longer welcome. The pair needs privacy and space for the eggs that will soon arrive, and those eggs require specific conditions: stable temperature, protection from predators, regular incubation by both parents. The cavity that seemed adequate as a simple overnight roost must now function as a nursery, supporting new life through its most vulnerable stages. Chapter 5. A toucan swallows a piece of fruit whole. The outer flesh dissolves in the crop. The hard seed inside remains intact, passing through the digestive system unchanged. 25 minutes later, the bird shifts position on a branch and the seed drops. It falls through layers of canopy, landing somewhere far from the tree where the fruit originally grew. And there it waits. This happens thousands of times each day across the rainforest. Toucans feed, digest, move, defecate. Seeds scatter. Most land in places where they'll never germinate. Too much shade, wrong soil conditions, competition from established plants. The seed sits there until it rots or gets eaten by something else. But occasionally one lands in exactly the right spot. Enough light filters through the canopy. The soil composition works. No larger plants are blocking the space. The seed germinates, sends down a root, pushes up a shoot. Years later, a new tree stands where that seed fell. We tend to think of toucans as fruit eaters. That's accurate, but incomplete. They're also planters, unintentional gardeners, working on a scale that shapes the entire forest structure. Every seed they carry away from a parent tree gets a chance to grow somewhere new. The distance matters more than you might expect. A seed dropping directly beneath its parent tree faces harsh competition. The adult tree already dominates that space, its roots spreading through the soil, its canopy blocking most of the sunlight. Seedlings trying to grow in that shadow struggle to gather enough energy for development, but a seed deposited 400 feet away lands in different conditions. Maybe another tree fell recently, opening a gap in the canopy. Maybe the soil composition differs slightly. Small variations in location create large differences in survival probability. Researchers wanted to measure this precisely. They needed to know how far toucans actually carry seeds, not just estimate based on flight patterns and assumptions. So they captured wild toucans and fitted them with small backpacks containing GPS trackers. The devices recorded location every 15 minutes throughout the day. Battery weight was minimal. The backpack design allowed normal flight and movement. The birds behaved naturally, unaware they were being tracked. The data showed something interesting. Toucans don't just wander randomly through the forest. They follow patterns, visiting certain trees in the morning, different locations in the afternoon, returning to roosting sites each evening, and those patterns determine where seeds end up. A toucan eats fruit at dawn from a tree on the eastern edge of its territory. 25 minutes later, it's moved west following its usual morning route. The seed drops in a location the bird visits regularly but which is far from where the fruit grew. On average, seeds traveled about 470 feet from their origin point. Some went farther, some less, but the typical distance puts seeds well outside the parent tree's immediate influence. More than half the seeds ended up at least 328 feet away. A smaller portion traveled over 600 feet. These longer dispersal events matter most for forest diversity. They create genetic mixing between distant populations, prevent inbreeding, allow species to colonize new areas. The timing of feeding influences dispersal distance. Toucans eating fruit early in the morning tend to carry seeds farther than birds feeding at midday. The reason relates to activity patterns. Morning feeding happens before the bird settles into its midday rest period. The toucan keeps moving, covering distance, relocating multiple times before the seed is defecated. Midday feeding occurs right before or during the rest period. The bird eats, then sits relatively still while digesting. The seed doesn't travel as far because the bird doesn't travel as far. Late afternoon feeding produces results similar to morning. The toucan is active again, moving through the canopy to different feeding sites. Seeds consumed during this period get transported substantial distances before being deposited. Some trees seem to understand this pattern. Their fruits ripen primarily in early morning or late afternoon, the times when toucans are most mobile. Natural selection favored plants that timed their fruiting to maximize seed dispersal distance. The trees that fruited at midday saw their seeds dropped nearby, reducing offspring survival. Over generations, early and late fruiting became dominant. The relationship between toucans and certain tree species goes deeper than simple seed dispersal. Some plants produce fruits too large for smaller birds to swallow. The seeds measure over an inch across, requiring a mouth big enough to handle them. Toucans can swallow these large fruits whole. Their beak size and gape width accommodate seeds that would choke smaller species. This gives them access to food sources with less competition, and it makes them essential partners for the trees producing oversized fruits. One particular tree species, the manduvi, depends heavily on toucans. Studies tracking seed dispersal found that toucans account for over 80% of manduvi seed distribution. Other birds either can't eat the fruit or don't visit manduvi trees frequently enough to matter. If toucans disappeared from an area, manduvi trees would struggle to reproduce. Their seeds would drop beneath the parent tree, germinate poorly, and the species would decline over time. This creates an indirect connection between toucans and other species that depend on manduvi trees. Hyacinth macaws nest almost exclusively in manduvi tree cavities. The wood has specific properties that make it ideal for excavating nest holes. Macaws need these trees to breed successfully, and manduvi trees need toucans to spread their seeds. So macaw populations depend on toucan populations, even though the two species don't directly interact much. The connection runs through the trees through seed dispersal patterns established over thousands of years. We see this kind of interconnection throughout the rainforest. Plants depend on specific animals for pollination or seed dispersal. Animals depend on specific plants for food or nesting sites. Remove one element and the effects cascade through the system in ways that aren't always predictable. Toucans visit dozens of tree species throughout the year. They're not specialists tied to a single food source. This generalist approach makes them valuable dispersers for many different plants. A single toucan might carry seeds from 10 or 15 tree species in a given week. The variety matters for forest health. Monocultures are vulnerable. If one disease or pest appears, it can devastate a forest where only one or two tree species dominate. But diversity provides resilience. Different species have different vulnerabilities. A disease that kills one species might leave others untouched. By spreading seeds from many plant types across wide areas, toucans help maintain that diversity. They create mixed forests where dozens of tree species grow together, each occupying slightly different niches, each supporting different animal communities. The seeds themselves benefit from passing through a toucan's digestive system. The outer fruit flesh gets removed, exposing the seed coat to air and moisture once it's deposited. Some evidence suggests scarification from digestive acids improves germination rates, though this varies by plant species. Larger seeds that get regurgitated rather than defecated show different patterns. Toucans process some fruits in the crop and spit out seeds after extracting the pulp. These regurgitated seeds often land closer to the parent tree than defecated ones because less time passes between consumption and deposition, but regurgitated seeds might have better germination success. They haven't traveled through the full digestive tract. There's less chemical exposure, less mechanical stress. The trade-off between dispersal distance and seed viability probably balances out across different plant species and different dispersal methods. Urban areas present new challenges for seed dispersal. As forest fragments into smaller patches separated by development, toucans must cross open areas to move between feeding sites. Some do this successfully, others avoid gaps, staying within continuous canopy cover. This changes dispersal patterns. Seeds only spread within forest fragments, not between them. Over time, isolated populations develop genetic differences. Plant species that can't colonize new areas eventually disappear from small fragments. Toucans moving between forest patches become critical for maintaining connectivity. Every seed they carry across a gap potentially establishes new genetic links, prevents isolation, keeps populations viable. The forest grows slowly. A seed deposited this year might take a decade to become a sapling, another decade to reach breeding size, decades more to form the kind of large tree that provides nesting cavities or abundant fruit crops. The dispersal work toucans do today won't show results for 20, 30, 50 years. But the forest that exists now grew from seeds dispersed by toucans generations ago. The pattern continues forward, each generation of birds planting the forest the next generation will inhabit. Chapter 6. Morning light reaches the canopy in scattered patches. 6 toucans sit together on a horizontal branch, spaced evenly along its length. Nobody moves much. They've already fed. Digestion is happening. This is the quiet part of the day. One bird shifts slightly, adjusting its grip. The movement is small, barely noticeable. Another bird preens a few feathers on its chest. The action is methodical, unhurried. A third bird simply sits, looking out across the canopy toward distant trees. You could watch this scene for 10 minutes and see almost nothing happen. The birds exist together in shared space without constant interaction. Sometimes proximity is enough. Being near the group provides benefits that don't require active participation. Eventually, two birds hop closer to each other. Their beaks come together in a gentle tap. Then another tap. The rhythm builds slowly, creating a pattern of contact that continues for perhaps 30 seconds before both birds stop and resume their previous positions. This is how toucans spend much of their time together, periods of stillness interrupted by brief interactions. The pace matches the forest itself. Growth happens slowly here. Change takes time. The birds have adapted to an environment where patience is rewarded and haste accomplishes little. Flock size varies throughout the year. Sometimes we see just 6 or 8 birds moving together. Other times the group expands to 15, 20, even 22 individuals. The larger gatherings tend to happen when a particularly productive fruit tree is discovered, drawing toucans from surrounding areas. These temporary aggregations don't last long. Once the fruit is depleted, the group disperses back into smaller units. The core flock usually maintains 6 to 12 members, a size that allows social interaction without creating too much competition for resources. Within these groups, relationships develop over time. Birds that feed together regularly begin to recognize each other. They learn individual quirks, tolerance levels, preferred perching spots. This familiarity reduces conflict. Everyone knows their place without needing constant reinforcement through aggressive displays. Bill sparring serves multiple purposes in flock life. We've seen it during courtship between potential mates, but it also happens between birds with no romantic interest in each other. Males spar with males, females with females. The behavior maintains social structure without escalating to actual combat. The sparring follows unspoken rules. Two birds face each other on a branch. Beaks touch lightly at first, testing. If both birds continue, the tapping increases in speed and firmness. The sound of keratin on keratin creates a rhythm you can hear from 20 feet away. Neither bird seems to be trying to hurt the other. The strikes stay controlled. Nobody lunges, nobody pushes. It's more like a conversation conducted through percussion than an actual fight. The exchange communicates something about strength, confidence, willingness to stand ground. After a minute or two, one bird usually backs away first. The other doesn't pursue, the interaction ends. Both birds return to whatever they were doing before the sparring began. Sometimes they preen, sometimes they just sit. The encounter resolved something without requiring a winner or loser. You see similar patterns in how people navigate social spaces. Someone enters a room. Eye contact is made. Subtle signals are exchanged about status, intentions, boundaries. Most of this happens below conscious awareness. The interaction establishes understanding without words. Tag chasing adds movement to the otherwise sedentary flock time. One bird hops along a branch, moving away from the group. Another follows. The first bird picks up speed, hopping faster, sometimes making short flights between branches. The pursuer matches the pace. This continues for a circuit through nearby trees before both birds return to the group. The chasing doesn't look aggressive. No one is fleeing in panic. No one is attacking. The movement appears recreational, a way to break up the long stretches of sitting still. Young toucans engage in tag chasing more frequently than adults. The behavior might help juveniles develop coordination and spatial awareness. Learning to move quickly through dense branches requires practice. Mistakes at high speed can result in falls or collisions. Better to make those errors during play than during genuine emergencies. Adult birds occasionally participate, though their sessions are shorter and less energetic. Perhaps they're maintaining skills learned in youth. Or maybe the activity simply breaks monotony, providing variation in an otherwise predictable daily routine. Mutual preening happens throughout the day within the flock. We discussed this behavior earlier in the context of mated pairs, but it also occurs between birds without romantic bonds. Flock members help each other maintain plumage that they can't reach themselves. A toucan tilts its head, exposing the back of its neck. A companion approaches and begins working through the feathers there, straightening, cleaning, removing any parasites or debris. The recipient stays still, trusting the other bird completely. The sessions last 5, 10, sometimes 15 minutes. Long enough to address maintenance needs, but not so long that either bird becomes restless. When finished, the roles often reverse. The groomer becomes the groomed. Turn-taking seems important for maintaining these cooperative relationships. You notice the flock moving as a unit when traveling between feeding sites. One bird takes off. The others follow within seconds. They fly in single file, each bird following the same path through the canopy. The line might stretch 30 or 40 feet, but the formation stays intact. This follow-the-leader pattern probably conserves energy. The first bird navigates the obstacles, finds the gaps between branches. Every bird behind simply traces the same route. Less decision-making required, less chance of choosing a poor path. The group arrives at a new fruit tree together. They spread out along different branches, each bird claiming its own feeding position. Space is maintained. Nobody crowds anyone else. The feeding happens quietly with minimal interaction, beyond occasional glances to monitor what other flock members are doing. When the fruit is gone, or everyone has eaten enough, the group moves on. Again, one bird initiates departure. The others follow. The process repeats at the next tree and the next throughout the afternoon feeding period. Evening brings the flock back toward roosting sites. The group might split at this point if preferred cavities are spread across the territory, or they might settle into cavities relatively close together, creating a loose neighborhood of roosting toucans. Birds entering cavities for the night sometimes call back and forth between sites. The vocalizations are soft, not the loud croaking heard during morning announcements, just quiet contact calls confirming everyone made it back safely. Then silence settles over the roosting area. The diurnal forest goes still. Toucans tuck themselves into their sleeping positions and wait for morning. Seasonal changes affect flock dynamics. During breeding season, pairs separate from the group to focus on nesting duties. The flock temporarily shrinks. Fewer birds participate in the daily feeding circuits and social interactions. Female voices run slightly higher in pitch than male voices. The difference is subtle. You might not notice it listening to a single bird, but when a pair calls together, often in duet, the distinction becomes apparent. Two voices blending, one deeper, one higher, creating harmony through overlapping patterns. The duets happen frequently between mated pairs. The birds synchronize their calling, coordinating the timing so their voices complement rather than compete. It's not true singing in the way songbirds perform. Toucans lack the complex vocal apparatus that produces melodic phrases, but within their limitations, they create something that functions similarly. Multiple toucans calling simultaneously can sound like a pond full of frogs. The comparison is apt. The croaking quality, the repetitive nature, the way individual voices merge into an overall soundscape. Stand near a wetland at dusk and you hear something similar, just produced by completely different animals in completely different habitats. Bill clacking adds another layer to vocal communication. Two birds bring their beaks together rapidly, creating sharp, percussive sounds distinct from throat-generated calls. The clacking happens during social interactions, territorial displays, courtship moments. The sound is loud. Keratin striking keratin produces a crack that cuts through the ambient forest noise. You can hear bill clacking from farther away than you might expect. The sharp attack of each strike, the way the sound doesn't decay but ends abruptly, these characteristics help it stand out against constant background rustling. Hatchlings make different sounds entirely. Their calls are buzzy, high-pitched, desperate-sounding. The begging calls that emerge when parents leave the nest cavity. Hungry chicks announcing their presence, demanding food, expressing distress at being alone. The sound is unpleasant, deliberately so. It motivates parents to return quickly with provisions. Juvenile toucans develop a whining quality to their vocalizations. Not quite adult croaking yet, but moving in that direction. The calls sound uncertain, unpracticed, young birds learning the patterns they'll use for the rest of their lives. Each attempt gets them closer to the adult template, refining pitch and rhythm through repetition. Calling continues throughout the day. Morning features the highest activity, with birds announcing presence and establishing territorial boundaries after the night's silence. But the vocalizations don't stop once the sun is fully up. Toucans keep calling through midday heat, through afternoon feeding sessions, into evening. The constancy is remarkable. Most birds concentrate their vocal activity into specific periods, usually dawn and dusk. Toucans spread it across all daylight hours. The intensity might vary, with some periods featuring more calls than others. But the general pattern holds. If toucans are awake, they're likely calling. Only night brings true quiet. The calls cease at sunset on clear evenings. The transition is gradual but definite. As light fades, vocal activity decreases. Final calls echo through the dimming forest. Then silence settles. We don't hear toucan vocalizations after dark. The birds are diurnal, active only during daylight. Once night falls, they tuck into their roosting cavities and remain still and quiet until morning. No nocturnal calling, no nighttime communication, just hours of silence while the forest shifts to accommodate species that prefer darkness. The acoustic environment changes completely between day and night. Diurnal birds fill daytime hours with calls and songs. Nocturnal species take over after sunset, adding their own voices to the darkness. Toucans participate in the daylight chorus and then withdraw, leaving night to others. Rain affects calling patterns. Light drizzle doesn't stop the vocalizations. Birds continue their usual routines, calling from sheltered positions beneath dense foliage. But heavy rain dampens activity. The sound of water hitting leaves overwhelms quieter vocalizations. Toucans reduce their calling during downpours, conserving energy and waiting for conditions to improve. After rain passes, calling resumes with renewed intensity. The forest is quieter, water-laden. Sound carries differently through humid air. The toucans seem to take advantage of these acoustic conditions, their calls traveling farther and arriving with more clarity than during dry periods. Wind complicates communication. Moving air carries sound away unpredictably. A call directed toward another bird might get deflected by a gust, arriving from an unexpected angle, or not arriving at all. Toucans adjust by calling more frequently during windy conditions, compensating for reduced reliability with increased repetition. The calling serves multiple functions simultaneously. Territory announcement, contact maintenance with flock members, mate communication, alarm signals. The same basic vocalization pattern adapts to different contexts through subtle variations in intensity, duration, and timing. An alarm call sounds sharper, more urgent. The rhythm accelerates slightly. The bird produces more notes in quick succession before pausing. Other toucans, hearing this pattern, respond appropriately, becoming alert, scanning for threats. Contact calls between flock members maintain a more relaxed pace. The standard rhythm, 90 to 100 notes per minute, proceeding without variation. These calls simply confirm presence. I'm here, you're there. Everything is normal. Territorial calls carry aggressive overtones without becoming truly hostile. The volume increases, the bird calls from a prominent position, making itself visible while vocalizing. The message is clear without requiring translation. This area is occupied, find somewhere else. Through all of this, the fundamental pattern remains recognizable. Those croaking sequences building from low to high, the rhythmic precision, the frog-like quality that defines toucan communication. Individual variation exists, but the species-wide template stays consistent. The forest fills with these sounds from dawn to dusk, layer upon layer of croaking calls, mixing with other bird species, insect sounds, wind moving through leaves, distant thunder, rain hitting canopy. Everything blends into the acoustic signature of the rainforest itself. And within that complexity, toucans call, steady, rhythmic, persistent, marking time through sound, measuring out the day in 90 beat per minute sequences that continue until darkness ends them. Chapter 8. The branch extends outward from the trunk, growing thinner as it reaches toward open air. Fruit clusters hang near the end, where the wood becomes barely thicker than a pencil. The branch wouldn't support a toucan's weight out there. But the bird doesn't need to go out there. It settles on a sturdier section closer to the trunk and extends its beak. The length bridges the gap, 7 inches, 8 inches of reach that puts distant fruit within range. The serrated edge grips the fruit gently. A slight twist and the fruit separates from its stem. The beak brings the fruit back toward the body. The toucan tilts its head upward, angling backward until the neck forms almost a straight line with the spine. The fruit rests at the tip of the beak. Gravity begins to work. The fruit rolls slowly down the length of the beak, moving toward the open mouth. There's no chewing, no pause to position the food. The fruit simply slides into the throat and drops into the crop. The whole action takes perhaps 3 seconds. Then the bird returns to neutral position and reaches for another piece of fruit. The same motion, the same backward tilt, the same gravity-assisted swallow. Over and over the pattern repeats. You could watch this for an hour and see essentially the same movements every time. The consistency is remarkable, no variation in technique, no experimentation with different approaches, just the method that works, applied continuously until the bird is satisfied or the fruit runs out. The tongue plays almost no role in this process. Most birds use their tongues to manipulate food, position it correctly for swallowing, assist with the mechanical breakdown of tough items. Toucans bypass all of that. The tongue is long, narrow, almost feather-like in appearance, but it stays relatively still during feeding. The beak does the work instead. Those serrated edges that early naturalists thought were for catching fish actually serve simpler purposes. They grip fruit that might otherwise slip free. They create friction against smooth surfaces. They allow the bird to maintain control while bringing food back from extended reach. Peeling happens with certain fruit types. The outer skin is too tough or bitter to consume. The bird uses the beak tip to pierce the surface, then strips away layers until the edible interior is exposed. The movements are careful, controlled, no rushing. Each strip of peel is removed methodically before the bird accesses the flesh underneath. The process looks almost meditative. Grip, pull, discard, grip, pull, discard. The peeled skin falls away, drifting down through the canopy toward the forest floor far below. The bird works through the entire fruit this way, removing all unwanted material before consuming what remains. Smaller fruits get swallowed whole without any preparation. The bird simply grabs, tilts, swallows. Larger items require more attention. The beak might break them into pieces first. Or the bird holds the fruit and tears away sections, consuming it gradually rather than attempting to swallow something too large for the throat. You notice the bird never seems hurried. There's fruit available. Time exists to eat it. The feeding happens at whatever pace feels natural. Some fruits are consumed quickly, others take minutes to process fully. The bird adjusts its approach based on what it's eating, but the underlying rhythm stays calm. Between fruits, there are pauses. The bird sits on its branch and simply exists for a moment, looking around, breathing, doing nothing in particular. Then it reaches for another fruit and the feeding resumes. These pauses punctuate the feeding session. They break up what could become monotonous into a series of discrete actions with rest periods in between. Feed, pause, feed, pause. The pattern continues until enough food has been consumed. Other birds might be feeding nearby from the same tree. Each maintains its own space, its own branch section. There's no competition for position, no disputes over access to fruit. The tree provides enough for everyone present. They feed in parallel, occasionally glancing at each other, but mostly focused on their own consumption. The sounds of feeding are subtle, the soft rustle of leaves as a bird shifts position, the quiet snap of a fruit separating from its stem, the almost inaudible sound of swallowing. Nothing loud or dramatic, just small noises that blend into the general forest background. Occasionally a bird reaches deep into a tree cavity, using its beak to extract fruit or insects from spaces other species can't access. The beak length becomes an advantage here. The bird can probe into hollows, feeling around for hidden food sources, pulling out items that would otherwise go unharvested. The serrated edges help with gripping insects as well. When a toucan catches a beetle or large caterpillar, those teeth-like projections prevent the struggling prey from escaping. The bird holds the insect firmly, positions it correctly, and swallows. The protein supplements the primarily fruit-based diet, but insects represent a small fraction of overall food intake. Most feeding sessions involve only fruit. Tree after tree, piece after piece, the slow accumulation of calories needed to maintain body temperature and support daily activities. The 5.9-inch tongue remains mostly tucked away during all of this. It might assist slightly with tasting, helping the bird determine if a particular fruit is ripe enough to eat. But the tongue's role is minimal compared to its function in other bird species. Instead, we see the beak doing everything, reaching, gripping, bringing food to the mouth, even assisting with the swallowing process through that backward head tilt. The anatomy has shifted most feeding functions away from the tongue and onto the beak itself. This creates some limitations. Toucans can't chew. They can't break down tough items mechanically before swallowing. Everything goes down whole or in large pieces. The digestive system must handle the work that other birds accomplish partially in the mouth. The crop serves as the first processing station. Fruit flesh breaks down there, separating from seeds and any indigestible components. The process takes time. While it's happening, the bird can't effectively consume more food. The crop has limited capacity. Once full, feeding must pause until space becomes available, so we see the bird finishing its meal and then settling in to wait. The digestion time we discussed earlier begins 75 minutes before the system is clear enough to resume serious feeding. The bird rests on a branch, occasionally shifting position, mostly just sitting quietly while internal processes work. You watch the forest moving through its own slow cycles, leaves shifting in subtle breezes, light changing angle as the sun travels, insects moving along bark surfaces. Everything proceeds at its own pace, and the toucan matches that rhythm perfectly. When feeding resumes perhaps an hour later, at a different tree, the same techniques apply. Reach, grip, tilt, swallow. The bird has been doing this for years. The movements are so practiced, they require minimal conscious thought. The body knows what to do. Different fruit types might require slight variations. Some stems are tougher and need more force to break. Some fruits have thicker skins requiring more careful peeling. But the fundamental approach stays consistent. The beak extends, the fruit comes back, the head tilts, the food descends. Young toucans learning to feed watch adults and copy their movements. The technique isn't instinctive, it requires observation and practice. Early attempts are clumsy. The head tilt might not be angled correctly. The fruit slips free before reaching the mouth. The bird tries again. Over days and weeks, the juvenile's technique improves. The movements become smoother. The success rate increases. Eventually, the young bird feeds with the same efficiency as its parents, the same calm repetition of proven methods. And years later, that bird will sit in a fruit tree using exactly the same approach. Reaching for fruit at the end of thin branches, bringing it back carefully, tilting its head to let gravity assist with swallowing. The pattern passes from generation to generation, unchanged because it works. The feeding continues through morning, then pauses for midday rest, resumes in afternoon. Each session looks like the previous one. Same trees visited on a predictable schedule. Same techniques applied to extract and consume available fruit. Same calm pace maintained throughout. There's something deeply peaceful about watching this routine. The absence of urgency. The steady rhythm. The way the bird simply does what it needs to do without drama or complication. Feed, rest, feed, rest. The days pass this way, one after another, through seasons and years. The forest provides, the toucan accepts. The balance sustains itself through countless small actions, each one barely noticeable individually, but accumulating into a life fully lived within the canopy's endless green. Chapter 9. Spring arrives gradually in the rainforest. Temperature shifts by a few degrees. Rainfall patterns change slightly. Certain trees begin flowering. The transitions happen slowly enough that you might not notice them day to day, but over weeks the forest moves into a new phase. Toucans respond to these changes. The pairs that form during courtship now spend time inside their chosen cavities. They sit together in the enclosed darkness, bodies pressed close in the limited space. The cavity has been theirs for weeks already. Now it becomes something more. The female lays the first egg. It appears in the cavity sometime during early morning, resting on the bare wood floor. White, smooth, slightly oval, about the size of a chicken egg, but rounder. The female settles over it carefully, bringing her body heat into contact with the shell. A day or two passes, another egg appears, then perhaps another. Most clutches contain 2 to 4 eggs depending on the female's condition and the available food supply. Each egg arrives separately, spaced across several days rather than all at once. The male takes his turn incubating. He enters the cavity and settles over the eggs while the female leaves to feed. They alternate this way throughout the day, ensuring the eggs maintain consistent warmth. Neither parent stays away long, an hour feeding, then back to relieve the other bird. The eggs sit there in the darkness. Inside each shell, development proceeds slowly. Cells divide, structures form. The embryo grows from a tiny cluster into something recognizable as a bird, though still far from complete. The process requires 15 to 18 days under steady incubation. You could look at the eggs any day during this period and see no external change. They look the same on day 1 as they do on day 15. All the transformation happens internally, invisible, progressing at its own unhurried pace. The parents continue their rotation. In, out, in, out. The pattern becomes the defining rhythm of their days. Wake, relieve your mate, incubate, get relieved, feed, return, repeat until darkness falls. Sleep. Begin again at dawn. Sometimes both parents are in the cavity together during changeovers. The space barely accommodates 2 adults, but they manage it for brief periods. One shifts position, the other settles in. A moment of contact, then the departing bird slips out through the narrow entrance. The cavity stays relatively warm. 2 adult bodies in an enclosed space generate heat that has nowhere to go. The eggs benefit from this stable microclimate, protected from temperature swings that might occur in more exposed locations. Around day 16 or 17, small sounds begin emerging from inside the shells, faint, peeping, barely audible. The chicks are vocalizing from inside their eggs, announcing their readiness to emerge. The parent sitting on the eggs can feel slight movements as the chicks begin positioning themselves for hatching. Hatching happens gradually. A tiny crack appears in one shell. Hours pass. The crack extends slightly. More hours pass. The chick inside works slowly, chipping away at the barrier between its current world and the one waiting outside. Eventually, the shell breaks apart enough for the chick to push through. What emerges looks almost nothing like an adult toucan. The hatchling is tiny, maybe an ounce in weight. Its skin is pink, translucent, showing blood vessels underneath. No feathers, no down, completely bare. The eyes are sealed shut. The chick can't see anything, won't see anything. For weeks, its head seems too large for its body. The beak is short, soft, pale. Nothing about it suggests the massive, colorful structure it will eventually become. The chick can barely lift its head. It lies in the cavity floor, moving weakly, completely dependent on its parents for everything. Warmth, food, protection. Without constant care, it would die within hours. The other eggs hatch over the following day or two. Soon the cavity contains 3 or 4 helpless chicks, all blind, all naked, all demanding attention through high-pitched begging calls that start whenever they sense a parent has returned. Both parents work now to keep up with feeding demands. A chick needs food every hour or two during daylight. The parents fly to fruiting trees, consume fruit themselves, let it process partially in their crops, then return to the cavity and regurgitate softened food directly into the chicks' mouths. The young birds open their mouths wide whenever they detect movement or hear sounds near the cavity entrance. The parent leans in and releases processed fruit into those waiting mouths. The chicks swallow reflexively. Their entire world consists of hunger, fullness, warmth, cold, the presence or absence of parents. Days pass in this pattern. The chicks grow slowly but noticeably. They gain weight, their bodies fill out slightly, but they remain featherless for the first couple of weeks. The pink skin gradually takes on more color, becoming less translucent as the chicks develop mass underneath. Around 3 weeks after hatching, the eyes begin to open. Just slits at first. The chicks can detect light and darkness, but probably can't focus on details yet. Over several more days, the eyes open fully. The chicks can see their siblings, the cavity walls, the dark shapes of parents arriving with food. Feathers start emerging around the same time. Tiny pin feathers pushing through the skin, still wrapped in their protective sheaths. The chicks look strange during this phase, covered in small spikes rather than smooth plumage. Gradually, the sheaths break open and actual feathers unfurl. The feather growth takes weeks. Areas of the body remain bare while others develop full coverage. The overall appearance is patchy, incomplete, but slowly the coverage expands until the chick looks more like a bird and less like a naked hatchling. The beak grows too, though it stays proportionally smaller than an adult's for many months. It's still pale, lacking the bright colors that will appear later, but it lengthens and hardens, becoming functional for gripping food that parents bring. By 6 weeks, the chicks are substantially larger. They're covered in feathers, though the plumage is duller than what adults display. Their eyes are fully open and functioning. They can move around the cavity, though they still don't venture outside. The parents continue feeding them, but less frequently now. The chicks can wait longer between meals, their crops hold more food. They're becoming less desperately dependent on constant parental attention. Around week 7 or 8, the first chick ventures to the cavity entrance. It peers out at the forest, seeing the canopy world it will soon join. The other chicks follow over the next few days, each taking time to look outside before committing to actually leaving. Fledging doesn't happen all at once. One chick might leave on a particular morning, while its siblings remain inside for another day or two. The parents encourage this process by landing near the cavity with food, but not entering, calling the chicks to come out and receive their meal. Eventually, hunger overcomes hesitation. A chick hops to the entrance, extends awkwardly onto the branch outside, and takes the offered food. The first venture beyond the cavity is brief. The chick feeds and immediately returns inside to safety. But over the following days, the chick spends more time outside. It hops along nearby branches, testing its coordination. Short flights between perches, building strength and confidence. The parents stay close, monitoring, occasionally offering food as encouragement. The other chicks follow the same progression. By the time all of them have fledged, the family group consists of 2 adults and 3 or 4 juveniles, all moving through the canopy together. The young birds still beg for food. The parents still provide it, though they're also encouraging the juveniles to feed themselves. You watch a parent pick up a piece of fruit and hold it where a juvenile can see. The young bird approaches and reaches for the fruit. Instead of just handing it over, the parent demonstrates the head tilt swallowing technique. The juvenile attempts to copy the motion, clumsily at first. This teaching continues for weeks. The juveniles gradually learn to feed themselves, to navigate the canopy efficiently, to recognize which fruits are ripe and which aren't. The parents' role shifts from providers to guides, present, but allowing the young birds to develop independence. By 3 or 4 months after fledging, the juveniles are feeding themselves reliably. They still travel with their parents, still roost near them at night, but they're no longer dependent on constant care. They're becoming functional members of the flock. Full maturity won't arrive for years. The juveniles need 3 to 4 years before they're ready to breed themselves. Their plumage will brighten during this time. Their beaks will develop adult coloration. They'll grow into their full size and strength. But those years pass slowly, measured out in seasons, in fruiting cycles, in the gradual accumulation of knowledge about the forest and how to live within it. The young toucans simply exist in the canopy, learning through observation and experience, waiting for the time when they'll form their own pairs and start the cycle again. Chapter 10. The branch ahead is perhaps 2 feet away, not far. The toucan shifts its weight slightly, preparing. Then it hops. The movement is simple. Push off with both feet. Land on both feet. The bird settles into its new position and pauses. Nothing rushed, just one hop completed, with time to rest before considering the next one. This is how toucans move through most of their day. Hop, pause, hop, pause. The rhythm continues across branches, between trees, throughout the canopy. Each movement is deliberate. Each landing is carefully controlled. The feet grip the bark firmly. 2 toes point forward, 2 back. This arrangement creates stability that simple forward-facing toes couldn't provide. The bird can hold its position on nearly vertical surfaces, on branches that sway in the wind, on smooth bark that might challenge other species. You watch the toucan hop again, same distance, same simple push, and land. The bird settles, looks around briefly, then hops once more. The pattern repeats. There's no hurry to reach any particular destination. Movement happens because the bird is moving, not because urgent need drives it forward. Between hops, the pauses extend. The bird might sit for 30 seconds, a minute, even longer, just existing on that branch, breathing slowly, occasionally shifting weight from one foot to the other. Then another hop, then another pause. The canopy provides an endless network of these pathways. Branches connect to other branches. Trees grow close enough that their outer limbs interweave. A bird can travel hundreds of feet without ever descending, just hopping from one perch to the next, following roots that wind through the green overhead. Some branches are thick and sturdy. The toucan lands on these with complete confidence. The wood doesn't flex under its weight. The surface provides secure footing. These main branches serve as highways, frequently used routes between feeding areas and roosting sites. Other branches are thinner. They bend when the toucan lands, swaying under the added weight. The bird adjusts its balance automatically, shifting its center of mass to compensate for the movement. A moment of wobbling, then stability returns. The thin branch holds. The thinnest branches don't get used for landing at all. They're too flexible, too likely to break. But the toucan's beak can reach them. The bird settles on a sturdy section nearby and simply extends its neck, using that extra 7 or 8 inches of reach to access fruit growing on wood too delicate to support its body. Hop, pause, reach, retrieve fruit, swallow, pause again. The sequence plays out repeatedly during feeding sessions. The bird doesn't need to venture onto unstable surfaces. Its anatomy provides access without requiring risky positioning. When gaps between branches become too wide for hopping, flight becomes necessary. The toucan extends its wings. They're smaller than you might expect for a bird this size. The ratio of wing area to body weight is lower than many other species. This means flight requires effort. The bird flaps rapidly. 4, 5, 6 powerful strokes, building momentum and gaining altitude. Then it tucks its wings slightly and glides. The glide lasts a few seconds before the bird needs to flap again. Another burst of effort, another glide. The pattern alternates, covering distance, while conserving energy between active flight periods. The flight path is usually straight. Toucans don't weave through obstacles the way smaller, more maneuverable birds do. They choose relatively clear routes and follow them directly. If a branch blocks the path, the bird adjusts course before reaching it, rather than attempting sudden direction changes mid-flight. Landing happens with wings spread wide, slowing the approach. The feet extend forward, contact with the branch. The wings remain spread for a moment while balance is established. Then they fold against the body and the bird settles into resting position. These flights are brief, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, rarely much longer. The bird covers maybe 50 feet, 100 feet before landing again. Then it returns to hopping as the primary means of movement. Hop, pause, the familiar rhythm re-establishing itself. You notice how little sound the movement creates, the soft scrape of feet on bark when landing, the quiet rustle of leaves when wings brush against foliage. Occasionally, a branch creaks under the bird's weight. But mostly, the movement is nearly silent. The forest itself provides more sound than the toucan does. Wind moving through the canopy, leaves rubbing against each other, distant bird calls, insects buzzing, rain falling when weather changes. The toucan moves through all of this as just another element, adding minimal noise to the constant background hum. Other birds move differently. Smaller species dart and hover, their rapid wing beats allowing them to hang in mid-air while investigating flowers or catching insects. Larger raptors soar on thermal currents, conserving energy through techniques unavailable to forest-dwelling species. Woodpeckers cling to vertical trunks supported by stiff tail feathers and specialized feet. Toucans hop, and when hopping isn't sufficient, they fly in short bursts between periods of rest. The approach is straightforward, uncomplicated. It works within the canopy environment they've inhabited since ancient times. The daily routes follow patterns established over weeks and months of repeated travel. Morning feeding takes the bird through a familiar circuit. 3 fruit trees on the eastern edge of the territory, 2 more toward the center. Back to the roosting area for midday rest. Then afternoon feeding in the western section, return to roost at dusk. The same branches get used day after day. The toucan lands in the same spots, hops along the same pathways. The repetition creates efficiency. The bird knows which branches are stable, which ones have good sight lines for spotting predators, which positions provide access to multiple fruit sources. Occasionally, new routes get explored. A fallen tree opens a gap in the canopy, forcing detours. A new fruiting tree comes into production, worth visiting despite being outside the usual circuit. The bird adapts, finding new paths, incorporating them into the routine if they prove useful. But mostly the routes stay consistent. The bird hops through known territory using proven pathways. The familiarity allows for reduced attention. The body knows where to go, the mind can rest, while the feet carry the bird through its daily movements. Weather changes how movement feels. On calm days, branches stay still and landings are predictable, but wind creates challenges. A gust might push a branch aside just as the bird is landing, forcing quick adjustments. Or make a thin branch sway unpredictably, too unstable for safe hopping. Strong wind reduces activity. The toucan stays in sheltered areas where the canopy is dense enough to block most air movement. It waits on thick branches that won't shift regardless of gusts. Movement becomes minimal during these periods. Just enough hopping to reach food or water, then return to a secure position and wait for conditions to improve. Rain creates different effects. Wet bark is slippery. The bird's feet need firmer grip to maintain position. Wet feathers add weight, making flight more demanding. Visibility decreases as rain fills the air, making it harder to judge distances accurately. So movement slows during rainfall. The bird hops more carefully, testing each landing before committing full weight. Flights become shorter and more cautious. The overall pace of the day decreases until the rain passes and normal conditions return. The bird ages gradually, imperceptibly. A year passes, 5 years, 10 years. The daily hopping continues unchanged. The same muscles perform the same actions. The same branches receive the bird's weight thousands of times without breaking. Eventually, the bird is old. The movements are perhaps slightly slower. The pauses between hops might extend somewhat, but the basic pattern persists. Hop, pause, hop, pause. The body knows what to do and continues doing it until it can't anymore. Young toucans learning to hop make mistakes. They misjudge distances, landing short or overshooting. They choose unstable branches that bend too much. They hop when they should fly, or fly when hopping would work better. But experience teaches. After weeks of practice, their movements smooth out, becoming efficient and reliable. The canopy never ends. It stretches in all directions, a three-dimensional space filled with routes and destinations. The toucan moves through it one hop at a time, tracing paths through green shadows, following patterns older than memory. The light is changing now, not suddenly, not with any announcement, just gradually, the way everything happens here. The angle shifts by degrees. Shadows that were short at midday have been lengthening all afternoon. Now they stretch across the canopy floor, merging into larger patches of dimness. The toucan sits on a branch it knows well. This same branch, perhaps 15 feet from its roosting cavity. The bark is familiar under its feet, 2 toes forward, 2 back, gripping the surface that has held it countless times before. The bird isn't doing anything in particular, just sitting, breathing slowly, existing in this space as the day winds down. Around it, the forest is making its own preparations. The shift from day to night doesn't happen all at once. Different species respond at different times. Some insects have already gone quiet. Certain flowers have closed. Birds that feed on the forest floor have moved to safer positions higher up. The toucan watches this without urgency. It's seen these transitions thousands of times. The pattern is as familiar as its own heartbeat. Day becomes evening, evening becomes night. Morning follows. The cycle continues, reliable as breath. Another toucan calls from somewhere to the east. The sound carries through the still air, those croaking notes that have defined the day since dawn. The bird on the branch doesn't respond immediately. It listens. The call continues for a few more sequences, then stops. Silence settles back over that section of forest. The temperature is dropping slightly, just a degree or two, but noticeable after the afternoon warmth. The bird's beak, which spent much of the day radiating excess heat, now holds a temperature closer to the surrounding air. The blood vessels beneath the keratin surface have constricted. Warm blood stays circulating in the body's core, conserving heat for the cool hours ahead. A small adjustment in position. The bird shifts its weight from the right foot to the left, holds that position for a moment, then shifts back. These tiny movements happen throughout the day, unconscious corrections that prevent any single position from becoming uncomfortable. The bird barely registers making them. The fruit consumed during the afternoon feeding session is still processing in the crop. The familiar weight of it, the slow work of digestion happening at its own pace. In perhaps another 20 minutes, the system will have cleared enough to make room for an evening snack if the bird chooses to take one. But there's no rush. The cavity is close. Food will be available tomorrow. Everything can wait. Another bird lands on a nearby branch. Not a toucan, something smaller. It settles for a few seconds, preens one wing briefly, then takes off again. The movement is quick, energetic. A different rhythm than the toucan's slow evening pace. The smaller bird has its own schedule, its own preparations to make before darkness arrives. The toucan remains still. No need to react. No threat present. just another forest inhabitant passing through following its own patterns. The canopy accommodates everyone, each species moving through its daily routine without interfering with others. The light continues its gradual fade. What was bright green 20 minutes ago is now a deeper shade, moving toward grey. Colors are losing their intensity. The forest is becoming a place of shapes and shadows rather than distinct hues. This transformation happens so slowly that you might not notice it if you weren't paying attention, but the toucan notices in its own way. The changing light triggers something, an awareness that the day is ending, that it's time to move toward the routines of evening, but not yet, not quite yet. The bird stays on its branch, letting the minutes pass. There's no external pressure to move immediately. The cavity has been there for months. It will still be there in 10 minutes, in 20 minutes. The bird can sit here as long as it wants. A slight breeze moves through the upper canopy. The leaves rustle softly. The sound is gentle, almost like water moving over stones. The branch sways slightly and the toucan adjusts its balance without thinking about it. The correction is automatic, built into the body through years of sitting on branches that move with the wind. The breeze passes, the leaves settle. The rustling fades back into general background sound, insects somewhere nearby. A distant bird call, possibly a species that will become more active as night approaches. The forest is never truly silent. There's always something making sound, some small movement creating subtle noise, but the overall impression is of quiet, of stillness, of a world settling into rest. The toucan's beak rests against its chest, the weight of it balanced perfectly by the structure's hollow interior and the body's adapted center of gravity. Early in the day, the bird held its head more upright, alert to activities and opportunities. But as evening approaches, the posture becomes more relaxed. The head dips slightly, the beak touches chest feathers. Everything about the bird's position suggests rest is coming. Time continues its slow forward movement. The light fades another increment, the shadows merge further. Individual leaves that were distinct earlier are now just part of general foliage shapes. The canopy is becoming simplified, less detailed, easier to process visually, but also less informative. Somewhere below, on the forest floor that the toucan rarely visits, nocturnal animals are beginning to stir. Mammals that spent the day sleeping in burrows or hollow logs are emerging. Amphibians are moving toward water sources. Insects that prefer darkness are starting their own feeding routines. The forest is changing hands, one set of species yielding to another as it does every single day. The toucan doesn't participate in that transition. It belongs to daylight hours. Once darkness falls completely, it will be motionless, tucked safely inside its cavity, waiting for dawn. But the knowledge of what's happening elsewhere in the forest is somehow present. The bird exists within these cycles, even the ones it doesn't directly experience. Another position adjustment. The left foot lifts slightly, resettles. The right wing shifts, feathers rearranging themselves minutely. These small movements keep blood flowing, prevent any muscle from becoming too stiff. The bird isn't consciously thinking about any of this. The body simply does what it needs to do, maintaining itself through constant tiny actions. The digestion has progressed enough that the crop feels lighter now. The bird could eat again if it wanted to. There's a fruiting tree maybe 20 hops away. Through branches it knows well. The fruit there would still be accessible in this fading light. But the desire to eat has diminished. The body has enough fuel for the night ahead. Food can wait until morning. Instead, the bird simply continues sitting. The branch beneath its feet is solid, stable. The position is comfortable. The evening air is the right temperature, cool enough to be pleasant after the day's warmth, but not yet cold enough to require the full heat conservation measures that will come later. This is an in-between time, neither day nor night, neither active nor resting, just existing in the space between states. The calls have mostly stopped. Earlier in the afternoon, multiple toucans were vocalizing throughout this section of forest, the croaking sequences overlapping, creating that chorus of sound that fills daylight hours. But now the calls are sparse. Occasional announcements from distant birds, but nothing sustained. The vocal energy that characterized the day is winding down, saving itself for tomorrow. One more call comes from nearby, maybe 50 feet away. The bird on the branch recognizes the voice, its mate, also preparing for evening, also moving through these final daylight minutes. The call says nothing in particular, just confirms presence. I'm here, you're there, everything is as it should be. The bird doesn't call back. No need. The information has been conveyed and received. Both birds know where the other is. Both will move to the cavity soon, within minutes of each other. The routine is established, repeated every evening, requiring no discussion or coordination. It simply happens the way breathing happens, the way the sun sets happens. The forest floor is now invisible from this height. The lower layers of vegetation have merged into darkness. Only the canopy remains somewhat visible, shapes of branches and leaf clusters distinguishable against the sky that still holds some light. But even that distinction is fading. Soon everything will be shades of black and grey, depth perception disappearing, the three-dimensional space of the forest flattening into 2 dimensions of shadow. This is when aerial predators become most dangerous. Owls moving silently through the darkening air, hunting for birds that have stayed too long on exposed branches. The risk is real enough that instinct pulls strongly now, urging movement towards shelter. The bird feels this pull. Not as fear exactly, just as a gentle pressure, a knowing that it's time to go inside. But the bird takes another moment. One more long breath, one more slow look around at the canopy that has held it all day. The routine of looking, of observing, doesn't end just because night is coming. The bird's eyes move across familiar territory, noting nothing in particular but somehow recording everything. Then finally it moves. The hop is no different than any other hop made throughout the day. Push off with both feet. Brief moment in the air. Land on both feet. Settle and grip. Pause. The action is automatic, requiring no special effort despite the fading light. The bird knows these branches. Darkness when changed their positions, another hop. The bird is moving toward the cavity now, not directly but in the general direction. The path winds through the branches, following the easiest route rather than the shortest. Hop, pause, hop, pause. The rhythm that defined the day continues into evening, unchanged. The cavity entrance becomes visible 2 branches ahead. A dark oval in the trunk, maybe 4 inches across. Small but adequate. The bird has been using this cavity long, enough that entering has become effortless. The movements required to angle the beak correctly to slip through the narrow opening, all of it is memorized in muscle and instinct. But the bird doesn't enter yet. It lands on the branch directly beside the entrance and pauses there. This is part of the routine too, a final few minutes outside before committing to the night's enclosure. The bird sits at the threshold, 1 foot, practically touching the cavity edge, looking out at the forest one last time. The sky above the canopy is still holding some light. Not blue anymore, a pale grey, luminous but fading. Stars aren't visible yet. That will come later, after full darkness settles. For now, there's just this transitional glow, neither day nor night, both and neither. The mate arrives, same approach, same series of hops through familiar branches. It lands on a branch just below the cavity entrance. The two birds are close now, within touching distance. They don't touch, just sit near each other, both looking outward, both making these final observations before going inside. No communication happens, no calls, no bill tapping, no preening, just quiet companionship. Both birds have spent the day within calling distance of each other, occasionally in visual contact, but often separated by foliage and distance. Now they're reuniting for the night, but the reunion requires no fanfare. It simply is. The first bird shifts position slightly, turning to face the cavity entrance. The movement is small but significant. It signals readiness. The evening observation period is ending. It's time to go inside. The bird grips the edge of the cavity entrance with both feet, leans forward, angles its head, turning the beak sideways to fit through the opening. The serrated edges scrape softly against bark. Then the body follows, squeezing through the narrow passage. For a moment the bird is half in, half out, tail feathers still visible outside. Then it pulls itself fully inside and disappears into darkness. The mate waits, perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps a minute. No hurry! The first bird needs time to settle into position inside the cramped space. Then the mate follows the same process. Grip the entrance, lean forward, angle the beak, squeeze through. The tail is the last thing to disappear, feathers folding as they pass through the opening. Inside the cavity, both birds are maneuvering carefully. The space is tight for one bird, very tight for two, but they've done this hundreds of times. Each bird knows where to position itself to minimize crowding. They settle in, bodies pressed close but not uncomfortably so. Now comes the transformation. The first bird turns its head backward, rotating the neck in a movement that looks impossible but is completely natural for a toucan. The beak comes to rest along the bird's back. Then the wing extends slightly, covering the beak, tucking it underneath. The tail lifts up and forward, arching over the back until it nearly touches the head. The entire bird compacts into roughly half its normal length. The mate performs the same series of movements: head back, beak on back, wing covering beak, tail over head. Both birds are now tucked into their sleeping positions, taking up minimal space in the cavity that seemed too small for even one bird in normal posture. The darkness inside is complete. No light penetrates from the entrance. The birds can't see each other even though they're touching, but sight isn't necessary. They can feel each other's presence, hear each other's breathing. That's sufficient. The warmth from two bodies begins filling the cavity, the enclosed space traps heat, creating a microclimate several degrees warmer than the outside air. This matters. As the night progresses and temperatures drop further, this warmth will be essential for conserving energy, for avoiding the need to burn extra calories maintaining body temperature. Outside, the forest continues its transition. The grey sky is darkening toward black. The last diurnal birds are settling into their own roosting spots, parrots calling softly to each other from within a tree hollow, woodpeckers wedged into crevices, smaller species huddled together in dense foliage. Each species has its own approach to the night, its own sleeping arrangements. The nocturnal world is beginning. An owl calls from somewhere distant. The sound is haunting, perfectly suited to the darkening forest. Other night sounds are emerging: crickets, tree frogs, the subtle movements of mammals traveling routes they know by scent and touch rather than sight. Inside the cavity, the toucans are motionless. The day's activities are over. Flight, hopping, feeding, all of it has stopped. The birds' heart rates have slowed. Breathing is deep and regular. They're not quite asleep yet, but moving in that direction. The body is powering down, conserving energy, preparing for the long hours of darkness ahead. The last light disappears from the sky. True night has arrived. The forest that was grey is now black. Shapes that were visible have vanished. The world has simplified into sound and temperature and the feel of bark under feet or feathers around body. The toucan's breathing becomes even slower. The metabolic rate drops. They're entering sleep properly now, not just rest, but actual sleep. The brain activity shifts. Awareness of the outside world diminishes. The birds are here in the cavity, present in their bodies, but their consciousness has moved elsewhere, into whatever place birds go when they dream. Outside, a light rain begins. The first drops hit upper canopy leaves with soft patter. The sound builds gradually as more drops fall. Soon it's a steady rain, not heavy but persistent. Water drips from leaves, runs down branches, finds its way toward the forest floor. The rain will continue for an hour, maybe two, then stop. Or it might last until morning. The pattern varies. The birds don't know and don't need to know. Inside the cavity, the rain is barely audible. The wooden walls muffle most sound. What does penetrate is just a gentle background rhythm, actually soothing rather than disturbing. The birds sleep on, undisturbed. Hours pass, the night deepens. Somewhere past midnight, the rain stops. The dripping continues for a while as accumulated water works its way down through countless leaves and branches. Then that stops too. Silence settles over the wet forest. More hours pass. The birds haven't moved. Their tucked positions are so stable that they could maintain them for many more hours without discomfort. The body knows how to sleep efficiently, how to rest without creating strain on any particular muscle or joint. The darkness begins to shift. Not yet lifting, but changing quality. The absolute black softens slightly. This is the deep pre-dawn, when night is starting its slow retreat, even though no light is visible yet. The birds remain asleep. Their internal clocks are approaching the wake time, but haven't reached it yet. A few more minutes. The breathing stays slow and regular. The forest around them is still mostly silent, though a few very early insects are beginning to stir. The nocturnal hunters are making their last rounds before settling into their own day-sleeping positions. Then gradually, something shifts in the bird's awareness. Not sudden wakefulness, just a slow emergence from sleep toward consciousness. The breathing changes rhythm slightly. One bird adjusts its position minutely, not fully waking, but not deeply asleep anymore either. Outside, the sky is definitely lighter now, still grey, but a living grey rather than the dead black of night. The shapes of trees are becoming visible again against the sky. The three-dimensional forest is reconstructing itself from the two-dimensional darkness. The birds wake slowly, no alarm calls, no sudden movements, just a gradual return to awareness. One bird unbends slightly, beginning the process of unfolding from the sleeping position. The other follows a moment later. Both birds are returning to normal posture, the compact sleep shape expanding back into the familiar form of perched toucan. The light outside is growing steadily now. The cavity entrance is becoming visible from inside as a pale oval. The birds can see each other dimly. They sit together in the small space, awake but not yet ready to leave. This waking period happens at the same measured pace as everything else, no rush. One bird moves toward the entrance, grips the edges with its feet, leans out into the early morning air, looks around at the awakening forest. Then it pushes through, squeezes out, emerges onto the branch outside. The air is cool and fresh after the night's rain. Everything is wet. The branch beneath the bird's feet is damp. Water droplets cling to every leaf and stem, catching the increasing light. The bird shakes itself slightly, ruffling feathers, completing the transition from sleep to wakefulness.